Hello, just a couple of quick items I want to cover here. And one is about the ongoing corruption investigation of Hillary Clinton in Washington, D.C. in general. And the other has to do with something that we don't hear about constantly, and we don't really sometimes understand what's being done, but through the major media and different kinds of formats, whether it's entertainment or whatever, news and so on, how we're being manipulated. And it's good to kind of know this and be aware of this so we can kind of counteract it in some respects. So that's what I want to talk about briefly here. So in the first one here, I'll bring up the screen. First one I say here, it's very unlikely that corruption of Hillary Clinton in particular and the culture of corruption in Washington, D.C. will be punctured. There's been a lot of talk in the alternate media about what's been going on behind the scenes, that Trump is playing some kind of strategic game with Mueller and Sessions and so on. And the more we see, the more I see, the less I think this is really going to happen in terms of actually bringing to justice these individuals, and even on a broader scale, do anything serious to minimize the corruption in Washington and in basically all institutions. I was looking at a video from H.A. Goodman, and he was talking pretty much, his theme has been pretty much to support the idea that they are going to indict Hillary and fully investigate the email scandal and the Uranium One scandal and the other things that have been going on with the Clinton Foundation, various things related to Haiti and so on, in the money. It may happen. I'm not saying it won't happen, but I'm skeptical at this point, and this was kind of what was brought up in this message here. See if I can get this up here. Sorry, I didn't have this quite on the screen the way I thought. Okay, so the first message I posted was, I said, I'm beginning to think no one wants to pop the cork on DC corruption by going after Clinton, except perhaps Trump, and he can't do it with no support. So they're going to slow roll this thing as long as possible and then dump it without fanfare after people get sick to death of being hope porned. We've seen this movie before. And one of the response that came in from it I thought was telling, and it kind of supported my idea there. It's another individual said, some years ago I heard Ortel say that, this is Charles Ortel, who's done extremely detailed research on the Clinton Foundation. He said, I heard Ortel say that if the entire Clinton charity scam is ever completely uncovered and studied, a minimum of 30% of everyone in Congress would be subject to arrest. And he added that 30% was a minimum. And indeed, there may be enough dirt to collapse the government. And all my senses say Sessions is dirty and or being blackmailed to keep Hillary out of court and jail. If he possessed a shred of integrity, she'd have been behind bars months ago. And that's kind of my take on it at this point. I think that you have to look at the implications of something like this. Going after a high-profile person like this, and there are other high-profile people, no doubt about it. The former FBI director, the former DNI, Director of National Intelligence, former CIA director. There's just more than enough potential targets here, not to mention members of Congress, that it seems unlikely that they would do this unless they find a way to put a boundary on this and just go after Clinton, maybe even on a limited basis, and then try and minimize it even at that. So I think that's my outlook on it. We'll see. I hope I'm wrong, but this is kind of where I see things are on that. The second thing I wanted to mention here was this. I saw a TV show this evening called Prediction by the Numbers, and it was on public television. I find it increasingly difficult to watch PBS programs because I'm fully aware, I guess, of what is going on in these programs. There's like so many things, there's a mixture of truth and falsehood, but the way it's done is kind of insidious. And the way I described it just in my notes to myself, I said, images, language, authoritative and solemn intimations, music and cadence, build a subtextual case that the predictions of scientists should be trusted. And in parentheses, an equivalence is being drawn to math. In other words, math is immutable and perfect and, can be trusted, and therefore scientists should be trusted because it's implied that everything they do is based on math. Well, there's several flaws in that, but I'll just go on here. Overt truth mixed with unmerited subtextual propositions. Included, of course, will be an extensive segment on weather and statements from the Center for Environmental Prediction. Counterfactual to the subtext information may be offered, but only briefly, and it will be minimized and so-called simple solutions suggested, which is itself is a deception, and more than one subtextual suggestion will likely be embedded in the content. Even for the small number of us who recognize what is being done, these subtle and manipulative methods can be very effective at influencing thoughts, opinions, impressions, and beliefs. And subtext is in the world of literature has to do with, you can have a surface story, an overt story, ostensible story, but underneath the surface there's a message also. There's a theme or an idea that's kind of being promoted, and I'm not saying that by itself is wrong. A lot of times the subtext of a movie, for example, may be more interesting and more substantial than the overt story. So the Jack Lemmon, Shirley MacLaine movie, The Apartment, is kind of a good one to watch. It's an older one, but it's a good way to see how the underlying story or the underlying things are alluded to in a very effective way. And a lot of these programs, they may even be, the majority of the program, let's say 60-70%, may be factually correct. But the other thing is the subtext and even some of the overt statements may or may not be either accurate or they're based on bad premises. And so this is just one example of the kind of thing that goes on, and you'll see this in news stories and from news outlets on television, radio, and online sources. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily even on purpose. These people may actually believe that what they're saying is true. This is the kind of thing that happens when you're biased and you believe you're right, and you really don't care about your bias because you believe it's in the right, for the right cause. And yet, there's a point where you wonder if these people have been chosen, to be the producers, directors, writers, the people that do these things are basically pawns in a game that's being played by other people. So I don't know, I can't prove that. I couldn't prove it, but even if I tried, but I still believe that there's an overarching emphasis in the media to implant and promote these ideas, and these are done in really indirect and subtle and very sophisticated ways. So just something to be aware of and something to keep in mind, no matter what kind of news we're reading, to exercise some critical thinking, and whether it's something that's basically supporting our point of view or not, we should be willing to look at these things with a steely, cold eye and make sure that they're not introducing bias and subtext that we shouldn't have in there. And because that's sort of kind of natural whenever there's a polemic or rhetoric used for any point of view, these things will inevitably seep in. I think on the left there could be, sort of an overarching architectural kind of strategy for doing these things. I think on the right, more of it, if it's done, and I'm sure it is, it's more just an inherent built-in bias based on people that have points of view that they're trying to get across. But in both cases, they're not good. So just something to be aware of, and that'll be it for now.